Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. Judy and I have not gone live since our last fiasco. Remember, Judy, when we went live?
When we got Zoom bombed?
Yes, we put out a link publicly, and it was quite a show.
It was the worst show I ever saw in my life. I'm still traumatized. But Faith wasn't so keen on going live today, but I was like, we got to do it. We can't give up. So let's just do this. So today's live format's going to be a little bit different. We're not going to be speaking to you verbally, but our chats are open. So as much as we can, we're going to be monitoring the chat, and we're going to be looking for your comments and potentially asking your questions as well when our guest hops on he's hopping on at 8:00.
8:00. So we have Dan Reynolds, and he is one of the authors, co-author of this big study that just came out recently, a baseball study, actually discussing the famous baseball study. And it's going to be a very interesting night because what we're doing is we're going to take Natalie Wexler's article, and she wrote about this study that Dan Reynolds and Courtney Hattan did. And it was entitled Misconceptions About This, but we want to get the answers right from the source. The people who actually did the study, this latest study that just came out, and he's going to be hopping on at 8:00. But Judy and I thought it would be fun to first go on with just two of us to just say hello. And what's interesting about tonight is there is a baseball game, and Yankees.
I'm not a baseball fan at all, Faith, by the way.
Well, we're taking everyone out to the ball game, right? To the ball game. And there is a Yankees game, and they're playing the Guardians, Cleveland.
Yes.
Cleveland Guardians. See how much we know about baseball. Which will affect our comprehension if we were reading.
I actually have family members that are at the game right now.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So it's just interesting that there's a big game. And as you know, Judy Boxner and I, my name is Faith Borkowski, and we are both native New Yorkers. And so obviously, when the Yankees are playing, the Mets are playing, that's our hometown. So it's interesting that we're discussing baseball tonight in connection to reading. And some of you are familiar with the baseball study, the famous baseball study. If you're not, when Dan Reynolds comes on, that's what we'll start with, just so there's an even playing field that everyone understands what that baseball study is. And Dan and Courtney actually took a close look at how this will impact reading comprehension. And Natalie Wexler wrote an article after reading this study, and Judy and I read it, and we're like, wow, this would be really interesting to do a live with Natalie Wexler's article and then the research study. And for those of you just coming on, the research study is entitled Fair or Foul: Interrogating the Role of Baseball Knowledge in Studies of Knowledge and Comprehension. And it is by Dan Reynolds and Courtney Hattan. And Marissa Markham was also part of that study. It was published in Reading Research Quarterly, ILA. And we are going to talk about that research study with Dan when he comes on at 8:00. And we're going to actually
interrupt you. I got to interrupt you.
Go ahead, interrupt.
Can you be honest?
I'm always honest to a fault.
That's true. That's true. Okay, so I don't love baseball at all. I've never loved it. I wish I did. Do you think I'm at a disadvantage if I was given a reading passage about baseball and my disdain for baseball? Do you think that would affect my reading comprehension?
I do. The question really is, what happens if, let's say, we built up your knowledge about baseball, right? And then you were given something else to read on a different sport, like lacrosse. I don't know. Do you have to have lots of knowledge about every sport? I mean, these are questions we're going to ask Dan the man. Hopefully, he's going to be able to answer it. We don't know, Dan, but hopefully, Dan has answers for us.
Now, Faith, how are you feeling about that? One of our viewers today said that we are the Literacy View version of the Spice Girls. Woohoo!
Actually said that we are the Spice Girls of literacy. So I think that's pretty cool. So since we are the Spice Girls of literacy, I think you are Baby Spice with your blonde.
Baby Spice!
You're Baby Spice. And because you're my little sister. And I guess I'm Scary Spice because I'm the one asking all these questions.
The scary questions.
The scary questions. So I'm Scary Spice. And then Dr. Molly Ness joined in, and we'll tell you why she joined in. And I elected her to be Posh. All right. So, to join our little Spice Girls group, she could be Posh. So anyway, this all come about. Well, Judy, we were selected, we were accepted as presenters for the World Literacy Summit. And people were congratulating us. And one of our listeners, let me see if I could find her name and give her a shout out. Where is she? It was Janine Hansen. I hope Janine is on tonight. Janine Hansen said, congratulations, the Spice Girls of Literacy. So we are honored to be the Spice Girls of Literacy. And Judy and I are taking our podcast to Oxford, UK. Woo! And that's April 2025. So if any of you plan on going, hopefully you'll go to our session. And we're going to be talking about this and posting about it. And we're going to post from England. And we are going to have a blast. So Dan will be coming on in about 7 minutes. If anybody wants to post any questions in the meantime,
great idea, Faith.
Do that now so that it's up there, so that when we do start, maybe we can take some of your questions.
So Faith, set up some of the context a little bit for our viewers so they know exactly what we're going to dig into, how Natalie Wexler ties into this and so forth. So we have 8 minutes left till showtime officially begins. So Faith is going to set up the context. And for these next 8 minutes, what we're hoping is that you guys place your comments, your thoughts, your questions in the chat, and we will be presenting them to our speaker live tonight.
All right. So the way this works is we have Natalie Wexler's article. Her article came out October 6th. So as you know, Judy and I are always on it. We're doing that breaking news. She came out with this article, and it was called Clearing Up Misconceptions About the Baseball Study. And she posted it on her blog. And it was about this study that just came out by Dan Reynolds and Courtney Hattan. And we will have Dan with us to actually dive into the research. And she called it misconceptions, but maybe she has the misconceptions. We want to really clear this up and get the truth and understand this, because as a teacher, as a professional, I am confused. I'm really confused by all of this. I, look at this and I see Natalie Wexler's article. And if I'm a teacher and I know Natalie Wexler's name, I'm listening to her and I'm expecting that what she's telling me is going to be balanced and it's going to be researched, and I hope it is. But she's talking about an article that came out by researchers who do this work, and we want to really hear from the people who are diving in and doing the research so that teachers, parents, you are getting the truth. So we never had this format before where Judy and I started off kind of chit-chatting about things first, but we said, you know what? We're going to try something new. And when Dan,
Faith, we got some love. We got some love from some people that already joined. I want to give a shout out to Dawn, our No BS bestie that was just on our episode about Faith. Remind our viewers what that episode was about.
Yeah, so I have all the episodes right here listed.
Shout out, hey Marta.
And so we have episode 95, where our bestie, Dawn DiLorenzo, was on. Teachers who speak up are written up. And she was with our other bestie, Sherry Lucas Hall. I don't know if Sherry's out there, but
Leslie just hopped on too. Leslie's in the house. Leslie's in the house.
All right, Leslie's in the house. And so that was episode 95. 94 was Badass Moms in Their Teens. And we had some great conversations with Stacy Klein and Denora Della Camera. And we had Sherry Vale. And so don't miss that one. They actually were our kickoff episode to adolescent literacy. And we're going to focus on adolescent literacy for the upcoming episodes in October with the Murphys, James and Diane Murphy and Trisha Miller. So don't miss that. If we go back a little, we had SRSD Plus. That was episode 93.
Wow.
Episode 92, we had universal screeners and benchmarks with the Acadians people. 91 was a spicy one with Trevor Alio, excuse me. I always get that name mixed up. And he talked about Are We Sold a Story with SOR programs. And episode 90 was with our friends from Texas, Kay Wijakumar, using questions and strategy instruction. So if you've missed anything along the way, catch up, keep up with the literacy.
Yeah.
We
and
are
also that episode with Nate that we just recorded. That was a real.
That wasn't our show, but that's right. Our friend, our bestie Nate Joseph had us on just the other day. So look for us. He interviewed us, and my friend wanted to know how that came about. My friend Harriet wants to know. So you guys go on to Nate's podcast because Nate usually focuses on research studies. But Nate is a big fan of ours, and we love Nate. And he just wanted to have us on to have that conversation because he knows that we are no BS. And so he wanted our opinions. It starts off with a little story about how we got together. Catch it. It's a really fun episode. So hope you will watch that as well. So people coming on, if you want to put any questions into the chat, you could do that now. We're going
to tell them what kind of questions we're looking for. Like, what's the topic?
Okay. If you have any questions about anything that you read, hopefully you read Natalie Wexler's article. If you didn't, we're going to put that into the chat. We're going to talk about it. We're going to kind of dive into different parts of it. And then when Dan comes on, he's going to be talking to us about the study that he and Courtney did together. And we want the truth. We want facts. He has Wexler's article as well. And I'm going to ask him questions about what he read and what he thinks of it and how it relates to his research. So, anybody, are there any questions coming up? Do you see any, Judy?
Not yet. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm going to place the Natalie Wexler article and the study into our Facebook group.
Okay, cool. Cool. So I definitely have questions. In Natalie Wexler's article, she said at the top that critiques about this miss the mark that was in her blog. I want to know what Dan thinks of that in terms of missing the mark. A lot of things that people write are not necessarily based in fact, based in evidence. It's a good question. So let's see what Dan has to say. He should be getting on now. I hope so. Hope he's not having any difficulty. Let's see. Dan the man, where are you? Do you see him coming on, Judy?
Right now, I see exactly what you see, Faith.
Okay, I'm going to ask him to get.
It's only 8:01. Let's give the guy a break. He'll be here.
I know. And he doesn't know, by the way, guys, he doesn't know that he's live. We didn't tell him that this is going to be a live podcast taping. So this should be very interesting. We're trying something new. Why not? And we're excited to do this. This is recorded. Here he comes, the man, Dan, the man.
What?
There he is.
Wait.
You are live, Dan.
Woohoo!
You are our first surprise live guest.
Oh.
Woo! Welcome. Welcome. So you are right now on the Literacy View, and this is going to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. You are big here, all right? I already told people, Dan, that you had this research that came out with Courtney Hattan. Unfortunately, Courtney cannot make it this evening, but I'm sure that you'll be able to answer lots of questions. I want to introduce you. So Dan Reynolds is a senior education researcher at SRI International and was an associate professor and chair of the Department of Education at John Carroll University when much of this research was conducted. And he has his email address here. Dan, do you mind if we share your email address?
Not at all. That'd be great.
Okay. Dan.reynolds@sri.com. So we're going to get started, Dan. The name of your study is Fair or Foul, Interrogating the Role of Baseball Knowledge in Studies of Knowledge and Comprehension. So come on, Dan, take us out to the ball game. So there's a Yankees Guardian game tonight, right?
It's happening. It's if you hear it in the background, it's because my kids are watching it in the next room. I'm raising some pretty big Guardians fans here. I live just outside Cleveland.
Nice.
Cool. Oh, wow. So it's a big battle between us. All right. So I don't have popcorn, but we're going to talk about baseball. So if I were to read something about baseball, and I don't know anything about baseball, but I do know something about baseball, but pretend I didn't know anything about baseball. Would that affect my comprehension, Dan?
I mean, that's the great question. And I think that what Courtney and I are trying to point out here, and what I discovered as being like a huge baseball fan and reading well-known studies about baseball and reading research, is that like I had to ask myself, like, what does it really mean to know what baseball is? Like, how do I, if you know a couple of vocabulary words about baseball, do you understand baseball? If you know some trivia about baseball, do you understand baseball? Or is baseball knowledge something deeper than that? And that was kind of a weird question for me to ask. I wasn't expecting to kind of get into that question as a reading researcher. I kind of thought that my baseball fan life lived in one world and my reading research life lived in another world. But this study kind of brought them together. And so I think the question is like what kind of text are you reading, and what kind of baseball knowledge do you actually bring? Those are, I think, the next steps to try to figure out what is the next level of reading research that establishes the deeper understanding of what knowledge and comprehension mean for each other.
Well, in the article, in Natalie Wexler's article, and I gave it to you to read, right? Her article was
Faith, just so you know, just for our viewers out there, I just posted the article also on our Facebook group, just in case you want to skim it quickly while the discussion's happening.
definitely. And don't worry, because you'll have a chance to ask your questions. All right. So it's called Clearing Up Misconceptions About the Baseball Study. So, Dan, right at the very beginning, Natalie Wexler said that people, when they critique this, they miss the mark. They miss the mark. What do you think about that?
Well, I think I was first off when you sent that to me, I didn't realize that Natalie Wexler was engaging with our work, and I thought, hey, this is great. Like one of the things I really love is when people like Natalie Wexler who are so good at getting people fired up about reading instruction and reading research. This is what a good translational science looks like. This is what people who are great storytellers like Natalie Wexler and people who connect researchers to practice. Like I want people to be constantly engaged in this kinds of discussion. So I started reading it. I was like, oh, this is great. I do think that there's a couple things that are a little off about what her critique of our article was. I don't think our goal was not to critique the baseball study itself. The baseball study itself is a nifty little piece of design.
Well, could
And
you stop right there? I don't know if everybody out there is familiar with the baseball study. So why don't we start there and then talk about what you think in terms of looking at what she had to say.
well, I mean, the funny part about it is, are we talking about the baseball study? The origin story
The
of this research
original,
paper
the
goes
original,
back several years. I was
yes.
working on a project with my friend Josh Lawrence. It was a professor for a long time at the University of Oslo, is now at the University of California, Irvine. And we were making videos for teachers to understand well-known studies in reading research. And he asked me to make one, and he said, "Oh, do a video on the baseball study." And so I thought he was talking about the Recht and Leslie baseball study, which is the one that Natalie Wexler brings up. But it turns out he was actually referring to another study. And it turns out this was during the pandemic. I guess I didn't have anything better to do at work during the pandemic. But I was just being a big baseball fan. I was like, oh, there are actually lots of baseball studies. And we discovered that, and lo and behold, there are actually 19 of them. So I'm going to start with what I think is the most famous baseball study, Recht and Leslie. But there actually are quite a few baseball studies. All of them examine different aspects of that. What is the relationship between what you know and what you can comprehend? So the the Recht and Leslie baseball study, published in 1988 in the Journal of Educational Psychology, a very well-known, very well-respected research journal, took 64 junior high kids and split them into four. They created four groups. They measured the kids' knowledge of baseball and split them into a high baseball knowledge and a low baseball knowledge group. We think that they didn't actually do a very good job of measuring knowledge of baseball, but that's a little bit farther down the road. So they gave them a multiple choice quiz on what are some facts and things about baseball, and then they also measured the reading ability. So they ended up with four groups: high knowledge, high baseball knowledge, high reading ability, in the sort of the top right quadrant, high baseball knowledge, low reading ability, high reading ability, low baseball knowledge, and low reading ability, low baseball knowledge. And unsurprisingly, the high reading ability, high baseball knowledge group did the best on the comprehension test about and then the students, so they categorized them into those four groups, and they gave them a half an inning of a baseball game. The kids had to read it, and then they had to retell it. They actually had to act it out with baseball action figures on a diamond. And the researchers measured how much they remembered and correctly acted out. It's kind of a neat way of measuring baseball knowledge. action figures. But they found, unsurprisingly, the strong readers who knew a lot about baseball did the best. The weak readers who didn't know much about baseball did the worst. But the big sort of kicker about this study that gets widely reported is that the students who had a strong knowledge of baseball, but who are low readers, mostly boys, outperformed the hot, good readers who had low knowledge of baseball, mostly girls. So that is a quick summary, and that has inspired so many people to conclude that, of course, the more you know about something, well, that and many other studies. This is only one of, and there are many more studies about knowledge and comprehension besides baseball studies. One of the things that we chose, though, is we think that baseball studies have captured the imagination of reading researchers. The baseball study gets widely talked about by Natalie Wexler, but not just by Natalie Wexler, by lots of other folks too, both researchers and journalists, both journalists writing directly to teachers and journalists writing in general educational. It's just one of those things that seems like translate to everybody's understanding of what it means to know something. And that was something that has interested me for a long time, just because I'm such a huge baseball fan. But usually in reading research, nobody cares about baseball. But suddenly, like, a knowledge of baseball is important. So that's the quick summary of what's widely known as the baseball study, and it's used as an exemplar of a whole body of research that suggests that a wide-ranging factual knowledge of the world supports students in reading texts about things that they don't necessarily know a lot about that exact thing, but they can use their background knowledge to support their comprehension of that particular text.
Got on. You and I were chit-chatting, and you said, I really don't like baseball, or I don't know much about baseball. So when you read Natalie Wexler's article, what triggered for you a thought? What was something that stood out for you in reading her article based on what you're thinking about, let's say, your own knowledge about sports and how it plays into reading comprehension?
Yeah, I think our article was very much, we published it in Reading Research Quarterly, which it's mostly aimed at a researcher audience. So we were not necessarily trying to make immediate recommendations for what teachers should do tomorrow. We were talking about how researchers can conceptualize better measures of knowledge and better ways in which we can take the next step. We actually, I think that Courtney and I and Natalie, like, we all agree, like, knowledge rich curriculum is really important. And I don't have any, where was I going with that sentence? I don't have any reason to think otherwise. And I think it's good for a lot of kids to have knowledge rich curriculum. But I think what Courtney and I are thinking about is, what is the next generation of research going to look like? Are we going to keep relying on baseball studies that make the point that a lot of factual knowledge is good, but what happens when kids need more than just factual knowledge, and B, like, what does it look like to measure that knowledge? So, one of my biggest thoughts when I reread the article this afternoon in preparation for being on this show tonight, and I said, one of, I think, her misconceptions about our article is that we dismiss that baseball knowledge is just trivia. And
I want to stop you right there. Let's stop, because you said the magic word trivia. I want to go to Judy for a second. Judy, did you notice that Natalie Wexler put into quotation marks, people who maybe criticize this point out that, well, it's like trivia, comparing it to trivia. So what are your thoughts about that, Judy?
In general, like the second faith, I'm going to be honest with you. When you chose this topic, my body got uncomfortable. I was like, oh, baseball. I don't like sports at all. Sports makes me uncomfortable. It's not something I ever really enjoyed. And I know some people listening today, possibly my partner, Paul, might be a little disappointed to hear that, especially since his kids are at the game right now. right before we started recording. They were in their little Yankee jerseys and so forth. But I immediately got a little bit uncomfortable. I was like, oh, shoot, it's an article about baseball and research about baseball. And, I was like thinking, okay, so am I at a disadvantage because I definitely have zero interest in sports? But then that whole conversation about knowledge building and strategies came back to me, and it's a topic that I'm extremely passionate about. So, I worry because I feel like there's no way in the world, no matter how much knowledge we give those students in our classrooms, that we're absolutely going to be able to deeply immerse in every single topic out there. There's just no way possible, right? It's just not possible. And there's definitely going to be some kids in our class that are more passionate about some topics than others. Now, do I strongly believe in the whole concept of knowledge building? I believe in it to the core of my soul. But my concern is that speaking about it like it's the end all, be all, end all, it's just not accurate. And helping kids learn skills and strategies to tackle text is equally, in my opinion, as important, because it's going to help kids, it's going to level the playing field, and it's also going to teach kids how to tackle text or a topic that they're not familiar with. There are strategies. I mean, just before this recording, I was in my basement. God bless Leslie Lord for all the stuff that she's taught me with the SRSD, Think SRSD. God bless Kay and her team at Texas A&M, and also Marion Rice at, I think she's at Utah, right, Faith? Yeah, I think, I don't hear you, Faith.
I think she's in Tennessee. Isn't it?
She's in Tennessee, right? Knoxville, Tennessee, correct. So there I was in the basement today tutoring, and I did have a text, and the student was relatively familiar with the text, but I was still teaching strategies on how to do a gist, how to tackle a gist in a systematic and explicit way. I was also using Texas A&M gave me a pamphlet about the different text structures, and that was something so valuable to the student, because even though he was pretty familiar with the topic, he didn't really know how to write those things in detail. And once we went through it and I showed him the strategies, yes, it helped that he had knowledge about the topic, which was about pilgrims and Thanksgiving. But it was so much more powerful, the work that he was able to produce in the written format, because he was also given skills and strategies to tackle that text. And just on a side note, we have some people typing in the chat as well.
Well, wait a minute. Let's get to them soon.
Yep. Yep.
Because you said something. You mentioned strategies.
Yep.
In Natalie Wexler's article, here's a quote. She said that strategy instruction has its place. It just shouldn't be in the foreground, meaning that it should not be something that comes first and foremost, and that basically this knowledge building is so important.
All right, so Faith, I got to jump in because this makes me go a little bit nuts. I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit nuts. Dan, my new friend that I'm meeting today, which I'm so honored to have you here today. I'm psyched. It's so cool that you're a researcher and you're so down to earth and cool and have this wonderful down to earth attitude. So Dan, is there any research to support that knowledge building should be at the forefront versus that other piece, the skills and strategies? Is there? And because I feel like sometimes when Natalie Wexler speaks, and this is nothing personal, God bless, I hope she's having a great day, but sometimes I feel like some things might potentially be opinion based rather than based in evidence. And I'm really, as I'm moving to be more aligned with evidence and research and pushing my own self, is there research and evidence to support that claim?
So one of the interesting things about that claim is that it's kind of tough to establish what defines a forefront, right? Like, do we have to measure what's going on in a classroom. If a classroom is 60% knowledge and 40% strategies, does that mean it's at the forefront? Does it got to be 80% strategies to 20% knowledge? That's a little bit. It's almost impossible to really precisely capture a ratio of like knowledge versus strategies over in a large scale study, which you need to figure out whether it works for a large group of kids and not just for a small group of kids. So I don't think research can go so far as to specify like what the actual ratio of knowledge focused instruction versus strategy focused instruction. But I just pasted a link in our chat box here that there's an interesting meta-analysis that came out 2 years ago of a series of studies that showed the potential power of content and literacy integrated instruction. That some literacy focused instruction, that is the stuff that we might see as content agnostic, strategy instruction that works no matter what you're reading. Whereas a content focused approach, whereas the stuff of what you're reading is most of that, integrating those approaches is better than doing a just literacy focused approach. This was for kindergarten through fifth graders. So I think overall, there actually is a substantial amount of research that suggests that content-rich instruction with content and literacy integrated instruction is really powerful instruction for kids, especially in K through 5.
So Dan, I'm looking here, and I found this to be very interesting. It says in her article, while they, meaning you and Courtney, while they say they're not against building knowledge, and it could be others as well, while they say they're not against building knowledge, none of these critics say they're against it, and that's in parentheses. They have a lot of complaints about baseball studies. In my view, all of them reflect some fundamental misunderstandings of what these studies signify. So here's my question. When she puts in parentheses, none of these critics say they're against it. Again, that's her view, that's her opinion, right? But honestly, when people say they're not against building knowledge, I really believe myself, I'm not against building knowledge. Why would any teacher be against building knowledge? I think that misses the mark completely. That's not what this is about at all. That we're basically saying we cannot just teach kids about every subject deeply. And this is not opinion. I mean, Tim Shanahan brought this out in, I think, a few different blogs, and I know he recently said it, where, as Judy said, you can't take every topic and go deeply into it so that every child would be able to understand what they read about that topic in a better way. So, I mean, I was taught that when you want to build some knowledge before reading something, you start off and you could level the playing field with some basic, thank you, Judy. She's giving me a cheers. All right. And then you could introduce vocabulary. I saw that Dawn Lorenzo mentioned something about vocabulary. Isn't this really about building vocabulary? I think it's partly about vocabulary, but just, understanding some basic information and then diving into the book without having to spend, let's say, weeks and weeks and weeks going deeply into everything. So there are different opinions about that. But when I see something like, well, none of these critics say they're against it, in parentheses, that kind of was a little upsetting to me. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, well, she's right. Like we're not against it. I think that one of the things that we see, like Courtney and I mean, to a certain extent, like I was a high school teacher for a number of years. I do a lot of research. I call myself a translational scientist. Like I'm interested in doing research studies, but I'm very interested in what happens in the classroom. A couple years ago, when I had a chance to take a research sabbatical for a semester from my job at John Carroll, I went right back in and taught tier 2 reading intervention in a high school. Like that's the kind of work that I really like doing. But it also means that like we are trying to push the field forward. And I think that our job here was not to critique the baseball studies that have helped us like really show people the importance of knowledge, but like go beyond that. So what Natalie doesn't mention at all in her critique is that we use a framework that called the multidimensional knowledge and text comprehension framework in our article, where we try to say that, hey, what matters if you understand text is not just the amount of facts you happen to know about it, but also how coherent is your knowledge? How accurate is your knowledge? What happens if you know something that's just wrong? What happens if you think that the South won? I mean, this is a silly thing, but like the South won the Civil War, or you think that the shortstops are commonly left-handed. I mean, that's a trivia fact about baseball, but it's also just wrong. Like there's the next level. If we're really going to understand as researchers that we need to go to the next level and figure out, okay, instead of just saying, kids need to know more about everything, which presents the obvious problem, as you pointed out, Faith. Like there's only 180 school days in the year. We can't teach in third grade. They're not going to walk out of third grade knowing all the things about everything. But what other aspects of knowledge can we as researchers and as translational scientists think like, okay, what does it matter how coherent? How do we build a coherent string of a coherent sequence of knowledge? How do we bring in how specific does a child's knowledge need to be? What really are the most, if we were going to teach a kid about baseball, with the baseball studies, I think one of the biggest misconceptions of Natalie Wexler's critique of ours was that we dismiss baseball knowledge as trivia. Oh man, I love baseball so much, and I am the biggest baseball trivia dork on this planet. I can rattle off all sorts of facts about baseball trivia, but I think that's actually a bad thing because we think that like knowing baseball means knowing, what a player's batting average was or knowing these obscure vocabulary words. The baseball studies measured baseball knowledge as, do you know these like weird baseball idioms? And it's like, oh, if you want to actually know something about it, something that matters, you don't need to know its idioms. You need to understand its concepts. You need to understand the very heart of what it's all about. If you understand American history, you don't need to know like the names of war generals. You don't need to know the names of bills. You need to understand the heart of what it means to understand the American system of government or the evolution of, racial and cultural and geographical history. Like those are the concepts that are the heart of what it means to know about history. But like the baseball studies, if you look at the way they're actually measuring baseball knowledge, it's like mostly trivia. It's mostly idioms. And that's where I think like getting to the heart of what it means to know something is really part of building next generation knowledge and comprehension curriculum.
The chat is exploding, and if we don't attend to it now,
Go ahead, attend to it. I have some questions after. Go ahead.
It's going crazy. Okay, so we have Leslie what said, why don't the Cabell and other metas mention Wijakumar's research? Wijakumar didn't build content but saw strong gains with strategies. Anybody? You don't have to have all the answers now. We could always get back to people.
Sorry, did you want me to tackle that one, or are you waiting?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think that there's an extensive body of research that suggests that strategy instruction can be a really beneficial way to build comprehension. I think if you read a book like The Knowledge Gap, I think Natalie Wexler correctly points out though that like a lot of those studies are fairly short-term studies. They're not studies of 180 days of second grade. Pointing out that a strategy approach devoid of content doesn't misses the mark of what reading comprehension really is. But I would not argue against strategy instruction, and I think that the idea that strategy instruction and knowledge need to be pitted against each other, I think that's a misconception. I think that there's every reason to see that strategy instruction can be built alongside comprehension instruction. I think that even if we're trying to like jockey about which one is more important, then I don't see the point in that. But I guess to get back to your question about like the strategy instruction research, I think those meta-analyses probably just didn't. I'm trying to actually remember the research design, whether the meta-analyses were comparing content and literacy instruction versus just strategy instruction, or like what they're comparing to. Like in a meta-analysis, you got to figure out like what what types of treatment groups are being compared to what types of control groups. And I don't off the top of my head remember how that meta-analysis was set up, what the control group was.
So Dawn DiLorenzo put in the chat, she said, you need knowledge to build knowledge. So many have shared the Velcro analogy. I recently read The Pearl by Steinbeck with a student, and without an understanding of the treatment of disenfranchised, colonized people, he had a hard time understanding the actions of the characters. I find one of the most important strategies is questioning. I want my students not to plow through the reading when they don't understand, but to stop when it doesn't make sense. So, one of the things that children do when they don't understand is they plow through the text, right? They just want to get it over with and then not really thinking about their own thinking. Your thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, I mean that all depends on what your goal of the text is. I think there's kind of two layers to this. A really interesting case, the pearl. Man, I haven't thought about the pearl in a while. I think, but there's a goal about comprehension. Do we define comprehension as understanding what happens to Kino? I think is the main character in the pearl. You know what happens to him, and is that the goal of comprehension, or is the goal a larger understanding about colonialism or about disenfranchised peoples? And I think and if that's the case, then I would probably go about the instruction in different ways. You know, if my goal were to have a understanding of the plot and the character, I would probably be teaching with some of that information as the sort of conceptual heart of the unit of instruction. But if my goal was about colonization and disenfranchised people, I would layer that as a separate, but also an important kind of preparatory goal. So like we actually talk about this. I'll put in a small plug for a book. Sarah Lupo and Christine Hardegree and I have a book coming out from Guildford Press where we talk about those two things separately. The concepts in the challenging content that we want kids to read, and also the knowledge. And I think that this is a beautiful case where we see that, like, you know, there's a deeper concept about disenfranchised people that's at the heart of the pearl, but there's also factual knowledge about what is a pearl and what is a diver that are essential to comprehending the text on that level. So we actually treat scaffold. The book kind of defines both of those challenges separately, but also talks about how instructional models can scaffold for conceptual understanding that is bigger than pieces of knowledge and bigger than comprehension of an individual text, but then also scaffold for the knowledge necessary to comprehend any given text like the pearl.
We have another thought here. Ed Jones, explicit syntax instruction seems very important. Van Cleve certainly thought so, but I never hear it mentioned.
By the way, Ed is going to be, he was here with us and now he's watching his tribe play baseball. So he's going to be listening for this response tomorrow, Dan. So we're counting on you.
All right, I'll do my best. Yeah, I mean, I think there actually have not been nearly as many interventions that have tackled syntax instruction, and I think that's because there were a spate of studies that came out about 10 years ago that suggested that explicit grammar instruction had actually negative effects on the quality of student writing. But those studies, I think, were different than what this. I think when we talk about explicit syntax instruction, and I think, and Natalie Wexler correctly, identifies that as a positive thing in hers, and I would agree completely with that. Like there are fundamental aspects of the sentence that are not explicitly taught, and we just sort of assume that kids pick up on as you go along. So I think I would totally agree with that. I would love to see some interesting research studies, kind of better better document exactly what does explicit syntactical instruction look like? Like that sounds like a really good hypothesis. I can think of a couple of studies that have shown some encouraging effects. I mean, even in my dissertation study, I was reading with 11th graders. I mean, I do a lot of adolescent stuff, so I think my background, I've covered K-12 and almost all the stuff that I've done over the last 20 years of research and teaching, but I know best adolescent stuff. And in my dissertation study, we found that we were really closely reading really complicated texts from a variety of subject areas, and we found that teaching students to unpack particular syntax moves, those moves were correlated with better comprehension outcomes on our ACT reading measure, like of really complicated texts. So that wasn't a case where we weren't doing explicit instruction, because it was one of the many different scaffolding moves that teachers could use when they were trying to guide students through reading really challenging texts. But we could hear when students would look at a really complicated sentence and they would only be able to paraphrase a piece of it. They would shy away from, or you could tell that they weren't seeing the relationship between the first half of the sentence and the last half of the sentence. They might be able to say what was happening in each of them, but they couldn't say how they related. That's where I think syntax is at the heart of it. I agree with Natalie Wexler that, writing instruction can be really powerful with that. I agree that explicit syntax instruction, I think that is taking reading research to the next level. How do we combine in 180 given days in a school year? How do we combine the optimal mix of knowledge-based instruction, strategy instruction, and even sentence level syntax instruction? Shoot, like we gotta keep pushing our research forward so that we can answer some of these hard questions.
We have Sister of Six.
I'll read that one. I teach kindergarten. Our curriculum spends 5 months on trees with very little writing instruction. What are thoughts that sometimes kindergartners need a breadth of knowledge?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like breadth of knowledge would be really important for kindergartners. 5 months on trees seems like a lot. I got my own. I like Sister of Six. I don't know if this is what your name refers to, but I got 6 kids, and I have a kindergartner in the next room.
Do you really?
I do. I have my own little reading research lab at home. I have an 11-year-old down to a 5-month-old. But one of them but one of mine, I have a Sister of Six who is a kindergartner. Well, she just went to bed. She doesn't get to stay up late to watch the Yankees and the Indians, or the Guardians, excuse me. But like in kindergarten, I totally agree that knowledge breadth, 5 months on trees, is too much. Like there's a rich amount of science content that you can cover in kindergarten over 5 months going on. Like I think also trees, I want to see not just the knowledge, like can a kid just label the parts of a tree, or are there biology concepts that are deeper about the interaction of plant life and animal life, the interaction of plant life and the atmosphere? Like that's where I want to see teachers be able to talk about the deeper biological concepts of content and literacy instruction.
Dan,
that I think would be the next level work.
Dan, how do we determine what knowledge is most important? Like who determines whose knowledge is most important? Like, what's important to me might not be important to Faith, or what's important to Natalie Wexler might be different than what's important to Dan Reynolds. So how do we determine, are we trusting the publishing companies are getting it right, or are the curriculum designers getting it right? How do we trust the people that determine what knowledge is most important? Because let me tell you, the knowledge that might be important to the kids that I work with in the South Bronx might be very different than some of the knowledge experiences that are important to the kids where I live in my town versus, just person to person. Oh, Dawn just said she bases it on the standards. So I'm curious to hear who determines what knowledge counts most, or what.
I'm just giving you a big cheers, Judy, because
you are.
I am.
It's my lucky day. I needed a cheers.
That was a good question. And then I want to get into some BS stuff. So
wait, but I want to hear what Dan's answer. How do we determine whose knowledge is most important, and who determines that knowledge? Do we have the knowledge gods out there who says, oh, we have to do trees for 7 months, or do we have to do Thanksgiving for a couple of months, or do we have to do the Spanish Inquisition, or do we have to do, what else do we do in school? Animals for 3 months. How do we determine it?
Sure. So it's really too bad that Courtney isn't here because I just posted a link in the chat box. Courtney wrote an article with Sarah Lupo back in 2020 that asked this very question. That any any question that just that doesn't actually put your any knowledge discussion of knowledge and curriculum that doesn't discuss whose knowledge and who gets to decide on the knowledge, like we're missing a huge aspect of it. And I think that the tradition of knowledge based research that Natalie Wexler often writes about comes from this idea, this like link to Ed Hirsch, that there is a general knowledge that just people need to know, that general educated American adults need to know. But like, I mean, this is where we actually get to this question of not just about like, oh, what research proves what the best way to teach kids read is, but like, hey, what is school for? Like, what are we here? Are we raising kids to give them the knowledge that's relevant in their own neighborhood? Are we raising them to be, kids in New York or kids in Are we raising them to be citizens of New York, citizens of Cleveland, citizens of America, citizens of the world? Like we got to ask ourselves who is. I think right now, like that question is kind of getting outsourced to publishing companies because it's also amongst the most difficult questions to answer. And it's a lot easier for anybody to say, cool, like these curriculum companies, they have a lot more time to sit around and develop the curriculum than teachers who don't have time to like sit and weigh the deepest philosophical implications of the question you just asked. Do kids in Cleveland need different knowledge than kids in New York? Do kids in New York need to know about apartheid in South Africa or the Holocaust in Germany or about, Maoist China? Like, hey, we got to ask these. These are questions that they're just asking what school is for. And I think we need to be putting up front about this. And one of the things I really like about Courtney's article asks whose knowledge, and the way that you asked it is that are we outsourcing it to publishing companies? Whose knowledge? I think Natalie actually point out one of our other articles where we look at one knowledge-centric curriculum of core knowledge, and we looked at the kindergarten unit on American history. It was a president's unit, and we were pointing out that like, hey, I mean, this is great. Kids definitely need to know about the presidents, but if they only read about historical conceptions of the presidents, do they ever have opportunities to see women leaders? They're going to get less opportunity. Whose knowledge so like Natalie Wexler correctly points out that like it's not as though knowledge is more or less important for boy or girl readers, but when we then construct knowledge-centric curriculum, we have to figure out what the knowledge we're putting in is. And we have to think about the messages we're sending to kids beyond just the reading comprehension that we hope they're developing, but the people that they're growing to be in the society that we're preparing them for. I mean, I wish I could answer that question. I'm not one of the knowledge gods, that's for sure. I certainly don't think that there should be any knowledge gods. I think the only knowledge gods is this collective process of all of us teachers, us researchers, us journalists, us parents, and to some extent us kids getting together to like make that claim and say what gets into our 180-day school year.
So, Dan, I think that in listening to you about like who decides, could that be just chalked up to trivia? Like we used that word before. So all these bits of knowledge, do you think that, let's say, people who talk about this might say, well, it's just trivia. What do you think about that?
So I'd have to. I mean, will give. I have not like actually taught with one of the like, well-known knowledge-centered curriculum, something like Wit and Wisdom or Core Knowledge or something like that. I have not sat in a classroom and taught second graders reading and literacy with one of those curriculum all the way through. I haven't even done like a systematic analysis where I sit down and analyze the full curriculum myself. I've looked at pieces and units of different types of these curriculum. So I'm going to say that I am sure that they do a much better job than just throwing trivia at kids. And my accusation was not that those curricula are trivia heavy. My accusation was that the baseball studies conceptualize baseball knowledge as trivia heavy, and I think that has bad implications for how we think about research applications. But I do think that like to children who don't see the deeper concepts at the heart of what they're being taught, it's very easy for them to dismiss those things as facts. Like the teacher who said, we're doing 5 months on trees. Like we're just learning a bunch of random facts about trees instead of really saying, hey, what is it? The tree is at the heart of the plant and animal world. The tree is at the heart of, oxygen and carbon dioxide, the ratio of oxygen to carbon dioxide that sustains all life on this planet. The tree is at the heart of so many different ecosystems. That conceptual heart has to knit together stuff. And Natalie Wexler correctly points out that, vocabulary words, and children will learn more vocabulary. They will learn more facts. They will retain those facts if it's attached to a rich schema. And that's where concepts come in. And that's where I would love to see research go beyond baseball studies and say, let's actually consider amount and coherence and accuracy and specificity of knowledge as together factors that influence how children comprehend texts.
Dan, how do you feel about thematic units?
What? Tell me what you mean by thematic units.
A thematic unit where for a couple of months you're teaching, like Faith, give some examples of some thematic units that you've taught in your career.
Like ELA type units where it might be like, overcoming obstacles or stories of survival or, redefining friendship or something like that.
Or you might, something like that, or like you might be doing a whole unit on, like when back in the day when I was in a balanced literacy classroom, we would do thematic units on like Eric Carle and book studies on different authors for a while and stuff like that. Is there any research to support that that's the way to go? Oh, Dawn gave me one. She made a comment from before. She said representation matters. And I know actually when people were selecting programs, sometimes they didn't pick the ones that showed the strongest research in terms of knowledge, but they actually went for some programs that actually represented more diversity. So that was something too. But she said another thematic unit that's often covered is like seasons and so forth. Yeah. Is it good to get immersed in these topics for a while?
So I would say I'm not like inherently against them, but I will say that I think that they can often be taught in a way that is just a topic. We're going to do an author study of Eric Carle. Well, why do Eric Carle? Why not do Mo Willems? Why not do any of the other authors? Like 10 million authors out there. Eric Carle is a great author, but I think that if we're just doing an author study of Eric Carle, we're missing the opportunity to talk about a deeper concept. And I think that deeper concept, even for kindergartners, like, hey, let's read 5 books by Eric Carle, and then let's read 5 books by Mo Willems, and let's talk about the actual craft of a Carle book versus a Willems book. And I am sure that kindergartners can see the craft and difference between, and so the unit is not a Carle unit, it's an authorial craft unit. I would say the other issue with thematic units is that they miss opportunities to talk about knowledge building. Right? If we wanted to do an article about if we want to do a thematic unit about representation matters, we can just have, here's a jumble of stories where somebody who wasn't feeling seen gets represented. And like, that's great. I mean, I'm not saying that representation is not good, but I think you can do representation and do knowledge building. There's no reason that it shouldn't do both. And when it doesn't do some rich knowledge building, let's talk about representation and do US history at the same time. There's no reason we can't do that.
So our no BS bestie, Maureen Ruby, just popped on, and here's her question. What are the essential questions associated with the units, and how is what is taught, learned, transferred by students to grapple with a novel problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's like some deeper curriculum design that goes way deeper than literacy stuff, the essential questions design or backward design, the Wiggins and McTighe pieces. But I love teaching with that, even in like my old master's courses when I was teaching our graduate courses in literacy. Like I would use that as a framework for teaching literacy across grades and across content levels. I had a high school chemistry teacher in my class once, and we were talking about how to anchor, starting with the essential questions, which he could understand in terms of chemistry. But then we had to ask him about the literacy aspects of chemistry that fed into those essential questions. So, I mean, I love that. I think essential questions is another way of talking about the concepts or the conceptual heart that could knit together an entire curriculum, which literacy feeds into answering. Then it gives a reason for all of that literacy. We're not just studying Eric Carle just to study Eric Carle. We're not just studying Eric Carle to acquire the skills necessary that help us, learn at Carl. Like, hey, we can understand how does an author's whole style communicate the stories that animate that world, and that's where I think I love that framework. That's one of the best ones that I've ever seen to curriculum design.
All right, so here's my spicy question for you, Dan. Do you think Natalie Wexler's articles, not just this last one, but generally speaking, push districts into adopting literacy curricula that center domain knowledge?
Yeah, this was an interesting case. I think the answer is yes. I mean, push. Is it just her articles? No, but I would be interested to see a research study that systematically analyzed what the most important factors in districts choosing curriculum A over curriculum B. I can't off the top of my head. I think someone's probably done that research, but like, what are the if you surveyed, district leaders, what are the top 5 reasons why you chose curriculum A over curriculum B? I think one of them might be like really well-known movements like the science of reading movement about knowledge and comprehension, of which Natalie Wexler is, for better or worse, maybe the most well-known journalist. I mean, I read The Knowledge Gap and I was hooked. I couldn't put it down. It's a great book. It makes reading instruction come alive. Some people like don't even think that reading instruction can be absolutely incredible. It's like something that I've devoted my life to understanding. And of course, everybody who's listening to this has done the same thing, or at least thinks we're not crazy for doing it. But she can, I think, talk to people who, aren't necessarily literacy people and get them really fired up about it. So like, I'm grateful
So
that
she has
she
a
does that work.
lot of influence. What you're saying is her articles do sway people or possibly sway a district into possibly purchasing a certain program when we know, and there was a study that basically there's not much difference between one from the other. And I know we had a conversation about that, Judy, on one of our episodes, and that came up that there's really not much difference in this, knowledge building type of, choice in terms of picking a program. There's not much difference. So, in terms of a district, they'll turn to people they're familiar with, a familiar voice or an article. They're not looking at Dan Reynolds right now. Sorry, Dan. You're a nice guy.
Why aren't they looking at Dan Reynolds?
Because they don't know Dan Reynolds. So
I'm not that good a storyteller.
I hate to say it, Dan.
You don't think everybody is reading the 22-page study that I read today?
No, they're reading a 2-page article that comes out in Forbes or comes out, somewhere else. And so clearly she does have, I think, a lot of influence, even though she had said that, where was it? She said something that it was implied.
Faith, I'm going to be honest. I think your name of being a Spice Girl, you're really living up to that name right now at this moment.
Fairy Spice? No, but it was in her article. She did say that even she can't possibly do that. But I do think that she has a lot of power because her name is well known. And so, Dan, I want to leave us with this. I want to wrap up. If you could give our viewers, often their teachers, some really just short advice, just brief, short, important advice about your study and about the implications of her article, what would it be? Not your opinion, based on the evidence. All right, based on the evidence, what would you tell us that's really important? What are the takeaways from this so that our viewers could walk away being a little bit more confident, because they get a lot of mixed messages? I know, I feel that way.
Faith, you're making the literacy views sound like it's the dating scene, mixed messages.
Dan, are you there?
I'm here. I'm here. You asked me a great question, and
We've
I
been
mean,
thinking about it.
way back in wait time, right? Didn't you get? Didn't we want anybody to learn anything? We got to give them a chance to think about
Yes.
it. Like,
Yes. So you know what? While you're thinking, I'm going to take a look at some of these comments.
so I actually do have. I think I have the clearest answer to me. Like I would say that I agree with Natalie Wexler and with a lot of the overwhelming body of research that says that hey, knowledge-rich instruction is really important to kids' growth from K all the way through 12. I think it happens in the ELA classroom in elementary school. It's got to be part of, the trees has to be part of the science. That has to be part of the biology. That has to be part of the literacy. Like that integration, the stronger that gets, the better off our kids are going to be. And I think that the baseball study has proven that we would love to have thought perhaps that a quick fix that, oh, if we just teach, poor readers a couple of strategies, they'll be able to take them wherever they go. Like that is, a pipe dream. Like that's not a sustaining way to do a strategy instruction on its own, even though that would have been perhaps the quickest lever to really jumpstarting comprehension for a lot if that approach was really able to deliver on that. So what I would say to teachers and what we call for is a richer understanding of knowledge and comprehension. How do we go beyond just teaching kids more facts? How do we teach kids the coherence and the accuracy of knowledge so that they are pulling it all together? So how do we make it so that teachers don't even see their knowledge-rich curricula as, oh, here's my unit on the War of 1812, or even here's my 5 months on trees. I want them to say, oh, here's my unit on the War of 1812. Like here's the unit where America is attempting to establish itself on an international stage and deal with domestic and internet. Like there's deeper concepts that are knowledge rich. And I hope that as teachers think about, I want them to be reading not just the studies from the 80s. I want them to be reading not just the studies that I'm doing now or that Courtney and I are doing now. I want them to be thinking about knowledge and comprehension of the studies that will come out. A lot of funding is going to knowledge and comprehension studies that are happening as we speak. They're going to be published in the next couple of years. I want teachers to be looking at those studies and thinking, okay, whose knowledge? How conceptual is the knowledge? Is it just a bunch of historical units that are one after the other, or is there deeper historical concepts that are embedded in? How can I teach my kids to think about bigger historical ideas in American history instead of just a bunch of facts about American history?
Last thought, BS about this topic. So, in other words, clear up any type of BS myths that are out there. Whether you read Natalie's article, did you think any of it was BS? Be honest.
I mean, I thought that she inaccurately said a couple of facts from our article. I mean, I think that she had said that Courtney and I were really thinking about baseball knowledge as just trivia, and we actually don't think so. Like baseball is a great game. Baseball has such rich history. Baseball has such rich strategy. Baseball has such rich culture, but you wouldn't know it the way it's measured. It's just a trivia question. So like one misconception from that is that we think that baseball is trivia, or that we think that people should be taught about baseball. I love baseball, but I mean, Judy, I can't blame you for like recoiling a little bit, because like I don't actually think there are major differences between baseball knowledge and school knowledge. Researchers chose baseball knowledge because they thought it would be uncorrelated with reading ability. They wanted to be able to separate them in the lab so that they could see whether these two things had independent relationships. But that's not the way it is in school. Kids who know a lot about history and science tend to also be good readers. So these inferences that we draw from baseball studies are not necessarily easily generalizable to curriculum issues. What happens when kids bring misconceptions about American history to the classroom?
Bingo. And that was something when we spoke to K. Wijakumar. It's late already. I'm mixing up the names. And Casey Lambright, that came up, and I wanted to just leave people with that K's I think it was her son, daughter, I don't even remember, had the wrong
It was her
background.
son. It was
Her son had the wrong background knowledge about something. So he was bringing his background knowledge to something, but it was leading him on a bird walk. So we don't talk about that. And as you said, that, it could be, that's a misconception as well, that just bringing background knowledge to something you're reading is going to be helpful. Sometimes it takes you in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the first generation of baseball studies did a great job at capturing the public imagination of showing that knowledge matters, and that the amount of knowledge is not an insignificant thing, but that the next generation of those studies will start conceptualizing knowledge in a really richer way. What does it really mean to know about trees? It's much more than knowing facts about trees. What does it really mean to know about baseball? And I think the farther we can get down that road, the more that teachers approach that knowledge with and honoring its true richness, then they'll be really doing their subject matter justice.
Judy, any last thoughts?
I have 1,000,001 thoughts. I mean, just to wrap it up, I think, I'm kind of attached to growing up in the 80s. I think I was deeply passionate about knowledge. I walked around with my atlas. I walked around with my encyclopedia. And I know that the way kids are, abstracting knowledge now might look different, right? A lot of kids in schools don't even have textbooks, although textbooks are making a big comeback. So I'm hoping that, we do embrace this movement of knowledge, but I equally want people to embrace the craft of teaching kids skills and strategies. I think that as teachers, many of us have been so focused on the science of reading and the whole movement of the foundational skills, but please get equally as passionate about teaching kids skills and strategies for reading comprehension and also for writing instruction. I think that's a really big one that ties in as well, because I think once all those pieces are fully integrated, kids will be better off. And I think that, we owe it to our kids to invest in continuing to learn. And I think that, knowledge is important because that's what I'm doing at night, right? When I hang up the literacy view, I'm watching videos of Kay from Texas A&M. I'm watching videos with Leslie Lord. I'm attending PD for Acadians learning. Acadians came into my building to teach me more knowledge about screeners. So I think for me, it's not one or the other, it's both. But the frustration that I have is that very often the knowledge building camp seems to make that at the forefront. And I think that they've changed their tone a little bit because of the literacy view. I'm going to take some credit for that. But that's about it. And I just want to thank Dan for coming here. Maybe I'll open up my mind and bond a little bit more with baseball. I'll turn on the TV and see who's winning. Does anybody know who's winning tonight? No?
I have not been following. I feel like I've been.
You mean you don't have that knowledge?
I've been too engrossed in this conversation.
It's been so great.
Yankees 3, Guardians nothing in the fourth inning. I just checked it.
Oh
Go
wow, that
New
means my
York.
family-
Yankees
Right.
are making it
Faith, that
count.
means my family members are coming home happy tonight. Faith, do you have any final thoughts or final words of pearls of wisdom?
No, I'm so happy we had this discussion. And I think that I'd like to hear these things right from the researchers rather than just have opinions floating around out there. And, you say something.
Oh, I need to get that cheers button out.
Yeah, you say something enough times. It
Faith,
becomes
how did we go
fact.
through the episode without you having the BS button out even once? Do you want to call BS on anything tonight?
Well, I'm going to just call BS on the idea that when people give opinions and they are not backing it up with evidence, they need to look a little bit more deeply at what
and cite the evidence.
Yes. And I think that's important. And I think that teachers, we need to be a little bit more discerning about what we see and hear. So there you go. There's my BS button. So let's wrap it up. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you with us. And we look forward to our next episodes about adolescent literacy.
Yeah, follow us on Facebook, The Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose. Join our group, follow us. Also follow Faith and The Literacy View and I in England. We're going to England at the Literacy Summit. And also, Dan, thanks so much for writing that article. And one request as a teacher, just break it down for us. We, as teachers, we want the research broken down even more so that we could make sure that we take it and we apply it into our classrooms even more. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your knowledge with us. And we're hoping to change lives one view at a time.
Thanks for having me. It's been a delight.